Welcome to the Believe Fantasy Football Show with Michael Fabiano and Lindsay Rhodes with so much to talk about today. We were planning on breaking down everything that happened at the Combine that was notable, movers in a positive direction, people who didn't have the best week, and maybe their draft status has been affected negatively, the ways in which that affects us in fantasy, and we'll get to that. But of course, there was some big news in terms of the veteran players in the last few days, most notably Michael Russell Wilson being released. So he's gone. I mean, I'm saying that like it's, big and shocking news. It's not even remotely surprising. We knew this was coming, but now it has happened. And so I know that you've come up with a list of landing spots for him.
Yeah, and I feel like, and we've said this before, that like Russell is the consolation prize.
Yep.
If you can't get Fields in a trade,
I know,
which we assume will happen, if you can't get Kirk Cousins in free agency, then you will settle for Russell Wilson. Isn't that crazy?
Yep, that's where we
and
are.
I will say this: worst trade of all time, right? Worst trade of all time, maybe in sports.
But the worst part about the trade, just to make sure that we are like being specific here, is not so much the trade. The trade was bad. The worst part of it for me was the fact that they extended him before he'd stepped on the football field. Because for me at the time, I didn't love the trade, but I didn't love them attaching themselves to him long term, primarily because in that last couple of years, but particularly that last year in Seattle, he'd put some stuff on tape that was concerning, and it did not have answers to it. It wasn't like I remember saying during that last year, I think they're going to come out at the end of the year and say he was hurt, even though they said all year long the whole time that he wasn't hurt. And then at the end of the year, they were like, no, he was totally fine. And you're like, well, why did he suck then? Like, why did these things pop up this year? We never found answers for them. So for me, I was concerned. Like, why?
Yeah.
Why was this so bad? We never got answers. And they were like, you know what? Not only are we trading the farm for you, but we're going to give you a lot more money unnecessarily because you still have 2 years left on your deal. Like, why'd they do that? That deal hasn't kicked in, Fabs. It hasn't even started. They give him a 5-year extension, and it's next year is year one of that extension. Like, they didn't need to do it. They are in the hole for all of this money, and not $245 million because, those contracts are never fully guaranteed, but they're on the hook. They're taking a cap hit of $80+ million unnecessarily. That was always my problem with it. Like, what are we doing here?
So I would say Atlanta. I would say Pittsburgh, the Las Vegas Raiders, maybe the New England Patriots, depending on what they do with their first round pick, which they could potentially take a quarterback there. You could the Minnesota Vikings are in play too, Linz, right? If Kirk Cousins is no longer a Viking, then Russell Wilson can potentially be an option for them as well. There are several teams that will have interest in Russell Wilson. And listen, I get it. He hadn't looked good, the last couple of years. I don't think it was terrible last year. It wasn't terrible. It's not really giving him a compliment, but he was a serviceable quarterback who certainly is no longer among the elite, not in real football and not in fantasy football. But I think those are the teams that I'd be looking for him. Pittsburgh, if they can't get a Fields or a Cousins, then Russell could end up being there as well. So, but no matter where he goes, I think the best landing spots would be Atlanta or Minnesota because of the talent that they have. And Minnesota would be the coup de grace because of Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson. That would be phenomenal for Russell Wilson. And if that happened, you would start hearing him being drafted a little higher, not high, but higher, like not, bottom 3 rounds. Let's put it that way.
Right.
But that's going to be the consolation prize for the teams that can't get the 2 prize potentially available quarterbacks, Justin Fields and Kirk Cousins. And I only say potentially available because we don't know that the Bears are going to trade Fields. We expect it. We don't know that the Vikings won't retain Cousins. We expect it. And there's actually been some news out there. I think it was Pro Football Talk that had reported that they're hearing rumblings that Cousins wants to go to Atlanta. So we'll find out, but Russell will be
looking for homes there.
Right.
I'd like
Yeah,
to hear that
exactly.
from someone other than Florio to, like, really get,
Yeah, right.
fired up
When Florio
personally,
said
but
stuff, I'm like, it's interesting. I want to hear it from somebody else. By
maybe.
the way, if you're tuning in, we've just gotten a report from Adam Schefter that Dalton Schultz is re-signed with the Houston Texans. So that's one less
Ooh!
tight end on the free agent market, which would
Oh,
mean
I don't know.
the Texans are not going to be, looking for a big name tight end in the upcoming draft. Hey, listen, Schultz was good. Now all they need is a running back. That's all they need.
Yeah.
And I'm writing articles over at Sports Illustrated, Lens, with like all the top 5 free agent running backs, and then you could throw DeAndre Swift in there as a 6th. If they get a Pollard or if they get a Jacobs or Saquon and they have dough to spend, that Texans offense is going to be even more fun to watch next season.
Yeah, it really is. That's gonna be fun. And by the way, with regard to the running back situation, Saquon, we now know for sure is not gonna get tagged by the Giants. We had an inkling that that was likely to happen. So pretty much all of these guys are gonna hit the market. All of these big name running backs
Yeah.
are not getting tagged or extended,
Mhm.
but the tag was the one that we were keeping our eye on. Goodness, there's so much to talk about here, and lots of reaction to the things that have already been said. But first, want to remind you that BetOnline continues to be your number one source for all your basketball wagering needs, including pro and college hoops throughout the year with up-to-the-minute odds, stats, and trends. You can follow your favorite team's path to the playoffs with in-game live betting, contests, and all the best player props. Experience the world's best wagering platform anytime from your desktop or your mobile devices. Head to BetOnline today to become part of the team, and remember to use the promo code BELIEVE for your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Russell Wilson's going to be interesting in terms of his landing spots. I think that you covered a lot of it there. Clearly, he's not option A or B in terms of the free agents. And then also, I think, the draft kind of complicates things. So I wonder how long Russell Wilson's going to have to wait for a landing spot. The one thing that does make him interesting is that he's getting, $39 million from the Broncos. So they could sign him for a really nominal fee. In terms of,
Yeah.
like, if there's competition for him, it will drive the price up. But I think that that's the most attractive piece of the Russell Wilson puzzle, is that you
He's going
could
to be
get him
cheap.
relatively cheaply. Yeah.
Yep.
And I also think it's very interesting and notable that he is, like you said, kind of a plan B at this point. I don't think that there's a team out there that it makes sense for them to be like, yes, Russell's available. That's our entire plan. Like, all of our eggs are in that basket moving forward. Because I also wonder about the reason that Denver didn't want him. And you mentioned that he was fine in fantasy this past season. He didn't look as bad on the field to the naked eye or the casual observer as he did the year before, certainly.
Right.
But
Yep.
there's part of me that's concerned about the fact that the reports that he took them out of the offense too frequently, and that he wasn't running the offense the way that Sean Payton wanted him to run the offense. And so I wonder if that is true. And again, why is that true at this stage of his career? I don't know. I don't know why we saw him be what looked like a good quarterback for a number of years, and then now it's like he can't do that anymore. I don't understand that, but it's certainly part of the equation at this point. And so I would wonder if wherever he goes, what that means for the fantasy value of the people around him,
Yeah,
because
I think, like, for example, if he goes to Pittsburgh, I would think it's an upgrade, slightly over a Kenny Pickett. Yeah, not a huge upgrade, but an upgrade. If he
an
goes to
upgrade over a
Atlanta,
bad
massive
situation.
freaking upgrade, right? I mean, like, over Desmond Ritter and Taylor hit him with the Heineke. I mean, huge upgrade.
But are we
If he goes,
maxing, I guess? That's my point. Like, I would much rather Kirk Cousins
oh
in
no, no, no,
Atlanta,
yeah,
right? Like,
100%. Yes,
for
yes,
and not
100%.
even just for the individual quarterback, but for the pieces around him. Like, Drake
Yes,
London's much more attractive to me if Kirk Cousins is the quarterback there than
no
if Russell
question.
Wilson's the quarterback there. I'm not
Right.
sure that he really gets the benefit of a bump if
Mhm.
Russell Wilson goes there.
You
Right?
know where I
Like,
think? Yeah, what about Vegas, Linz? Because we've got a pretty sizable asset in Devontae Adams, who is still a top 10 wide receiver, but ridiculously inconsistent last season.
yeah.
I, I don't think the Raiders are going to get Fields. I don't think that's going to happen. I could be wrong. I don't know that they'll get Cousins. Russell staying in the division. and getting a little revenge going on against Sean Payton and the Broncos twice a season, you put him there, I would feel a hell of a lot more comfortable with Devontae Adams as my wide receiver one if I had Russell, who, again, not the same player. But I mean, Garoppolo and your AOC, as you like to call Aiden O'Connell, like, hell no, I don't want those guys. And then when you look at what the other potential options are for the Raiders, if they don't get one of those three guys, I mean, like, there's not a whole heck of a lot out there. So the Raiders, I think, got to be in play here for Russell Wilson as well if they can't get one of the other two guys. And really, we haven't heard the Raiders tied to Fields or tied to Cousins. Doesn't mean that they're not, or they might not be in the future. But I think Russell in Las Vegas is a pretty interesting scenario too.
Yeah, that would not. I mean, I would not want to. Let's see, my brother's a hardcore Raiders fan, so I always look at things through his prism where the Raiders are concerned. I think he would call me up and he would be bummed if they got Russell Wilson. Like, it's not
Really,
exciting.
but alternatively, Linz, they don't have.
I understand, but I'm just saying the alternative. Go ahead.
Oh, I love you so much. All right, you talk. Ladies first.
Okay, I'll go. The alternative in this scenario, and I know that you're saying compared to what they have, which is AOC and or something in that vein, I'm comparing it to the other options, which are go make a move to get Justin Fields, which, by the way, we continue to hear that it's not going to be that expensive to go get him. We continue to hear people saying that it's not a robust market out there for Justin Fields. I would rather have Justin Fields if I'm a Raiders fan than Russell Wilson personally, because I feel like there's more unknown upside attached to that. Like Russell Wilson, you're getting on the back end of his career at the very least, and a declining asset that you don't even know why he's declining. Like, that's confusing to me. I don't want it. I want it over other certain options, right? But in this case, if it's, hey, I could be aggressive in the draft and try and make a move up to go get a quarterback, then I would like my team to do that, or be a little bit aggressive on the Justin Fields thing. There are options out there that I would rather have than than Russell Wilson. And that's what I mean when I'm like, oh, great. So we get like the plan C here, Raiders, that's not exciting.
The Raiders feel like a team that wants to win now, especially with the way that they finished last year, with Antonio Pierce as the head coach. And they have the 13th overall pick. I mean, they could maybe move up, but at 13, I mean, maybe JJ McCarthy will be there, but there's a lot of talk about him going high. I mean, Penix, I think he will certainly be there, but I don't know that the Raiders are going to be able to get a quarterback that's going to help them win now. And I'm looking at things from the fantasy perspective. Right. And from a fantasy perspective, I'd rather have Devontae Adams catching passes from Russell Wilson than the majority of the other quarterback options that are realistic options for the Raiders. So, and I know Russell is declined. I mean, listen, you watch the tape, you watch the guy play. He's not the same dude. But still, we had a lot of lousy quarterback play last year, and he was still the QB 14 in fantasy. Yeah. So he was barely outside of the top 12, which maybe says more about the quarterback position than it does about Russell. But still, he wasn't awful.
You know what I just thought of, Fabs? And I don't Antonio Pierce is there talking about the Raider way and trying to build up this like gritty and like we're going to be the bad guys. And then you sign Russell Wilson to be your quarterback.
That's true. Yeah, he doesn't have. Yeah, he's not exactly like a Ben Roethlisberger type of like, I would agree there. Yes, I would.
And what's his new slogan? Like, what's his "Let's Ride" for the Raiders? Like, if he goes there and he does that kind of corny shit, like, no, ew. Like, there's not a worse team or brand to attach that to right now in terms of what they're trying to build and who they want to be seen as. And then they bring in Russell Wilson. And he's like, let's win, baby. I don't know. I can't see it.
No, I get it. I certainly understand that. But that's going to be fascinating. And when you think about some of the teams that need quarterbacks, right? Chicago, they don't need one. They're going to have a surplus. They'll trade away Fields and draft Caleb Williams. The Commanders are going to get a quarterback at 2, unless they trade down, which I don't know why they would. The Patriots could get their quarterback at 3, unless they, go with Marvin Harrison Jr.
Dude,
I would think they would go with a quarterback. And then you look at 4, Arizona's got their quarterback. The Chargers have their quarterback. The Giants, we heard, and I watched part of the Rich Eisen show, and Rich had some rumors going around combine that he heard, and one of them was that the Giants are done with Daniel Jones. So that's crazy. After, we were talking about Daniel Jones or Saquon at this time last year, and they spend all the dough on Daniel Jones. And I said that was a lousy move, and it ended up being a lousy move. Maybe now both of the guys are going to be off the team in 2024. I don't know. But the Giants at 6 could be looking for a quarterback. We would assume Tennessee is going to stick with Will Levis. Atlanta, we would assume, is going to be bringing someone in, whether it's Kirk Cousins or it's Justin Fields via trade. We'll find out. Chicago's going to have their quarterback. The Jets have their quarterback. The Vikings, I mean, J.J. McCarthy could be there at 11. We'll find out. I mean, and then Denver. What about, and we talked about this, I think, last week on the show, like Kirk Cousins going to Denver. Like now Denver has a gaping hole at quarterback. And the Broncos, besides Peyton Manning, which was the biggest no-brainer in the history of signing quarterbacks, they have been awful with their decisions at quarterback. Terrible. They traded everything for Russell Wilson, and he blew for 2 years. 1 year, and then this year he kind of blew. He wasn't great, but he wasn't Russell Wilson. The whole when they drafted and Paxton Lynch, that thing blew up in their face. They have been bad. Tim Tebow, they have been bad. Yeah, the Broncos when it comes to making decisions at the quarterback position, but they're going to need one. And at 12. There may be a quarterback that they like. McCarthy might be there. I don't know. Maybe they try to trade up. But what do they trade? All their draft capitals in Seattle. Right? So, I don't know what they're going to do. It's going to be fascinating. So
it really will. There's so many potential landing spots out there for all these people, and that somebody's going to surprise us and enter the chat that isn't obvious. And Ben Solak from The Ringer floated in his post-combine article a really interesting concept, I think, and that was Fields to Cleveland. Whoa. And here's the thought, because here's why. Yeah, well, Deshaun Watson's not long for Cleveland, and we've already seen
$230 million guaranteed dollars, kid.
I get it. I totally get it. But part of that's already been paid out, right? Like, so we're cutting into that. You're gonna have him there for another year? But then at some point, this is going in a direction that the Russell Wilson deal went in Denver. Like, unless he turns things around dramatically, right? Like, we haven't seen any indication this is a guy who's going to finish out that career and they're going to pay him every dollar and then sign him to more. Like, this is going to end before that contract is actually up. It was an awful contract, much like the Russell Wilson contract was an awful contract. So they're going to get out at some point early. I think this gives them an out. If they did bring in Justin Fields, it gives them a potential exit strategy from that, where if you can find another quarterback to plug in there and you're giving up a 3 or we're hearing really low trade compensation for Justin Fields. So if you give up a 3rd round pick, bring in Justin Fields and then put him on the field. I'm 100% me too. You and me are in the same.
At least a late 1 or something. I don't get it.
I don't either. We'll see. We'll see if he is worth that. We don't know yet. That deal hasn't happened, but there are a lot of people saying that it's, Diana Rossini went to Combine and she came back saying keep talking to people, the market's not as robust as everybody thinks for Justin Fields. And
I don't get it. Yeah. It's not like, geez Louise. He's a young guy. He's not even in the prime of his career yet. And teams don't give him a 1.
I know.
You look back at now hindsight, of course, but Russell was he was worth all of the draft capital and the players that Seattle acquired in return, because that's what the Broncos were willing to pay. And a team's not willing to say, hey, let me look at my my draft order here. Right. So say, for example, a team I don't know, Pittsburgh, right? You're telling me the 20th overall pick is not worth Justin Fields? I don't get it. Listen, I'm not a scout. I am not a GM. I don't know.
What did you use on Pickett?
I don't get it. It's very strange to me that Justin Fields is not worth a 20th overall pick in the draft.
I know. I don't.
But for Pittsburgh, and that would solve a lot of Pittsburgh's problems too. If Pittsburgh went to the Bears right now and said, you know what, we'll give you 20 for Fields.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be the best offer that they're going to get, assuming all of the reports that we're hearing are right, that it's all second day player. I don't know. To me, it's just bananas. I don't get it, but I guess it depends on how bad a team wants Justin Fields. And everyone's always like, it's always about like, oh, I got to get a bargain. I got to get a bargain. Like Denver, they went overboard in trying to get Russell Wilson. They did, and they got completely burned. But I don't think giving up a 20th overall pick for Justin Fields, who's what, 24, 25 years old? I would take that all day long if I was Pittsburgh and Chicago. I would do that deal right now.
And here's another reason, too. We have so many examples that we've discussed in the show already about people giving up way more than they should have for quarterbacks because you're screwed if you don't have one. You're screwed. Yeah. If you don't have a quarterback, you don't have anything. And so people will do things out of desperation in order to hold on to quarterbacks or bring in quarterbacks. The Russell Wilson deal is the prime example. Like that was an awful, awful situation where they gave up way too much because they were desperate. And so they gave him the benefit of the doubt and he didn't necessarily deserve that. And now they're screwed in that department and cutting bait. Daniel Jones, they signed him to a deal because if it had gone a different direction this year and he'd looked good, then they would have gotten him for a relative deal at quarterback. And now they're looking smart and they have a quarterback. That didn't work out that way either, but they swung on that one and it looks like missed, but like they took the swing. There are so many examples of teams that are willing to swing at quarterbacks because the payoff is everything. And if you miss, then okay, like I guess, but you got to take the swings. So to me, that's why I'm so confused about the Justin Fields stuff.
Drafts. We see it in drafts too. 100%. Zach Wilson had one good year in college and a really cool throw in his freaking pro day.
Yeah, and they're like, maybe
second overall.
Yeah,
and it's we can go back, Lindsay. You can go back 20 years, 30 years in the NFL draft lore and history, and see teams that reached for EJ Manuel, Christian Ponder. Like I can go through a ton of these guys, and people reached for them because of like a small sample size of success, or they wanted to take it, and it blew up in their face. Rob Johnson, who you went to school with,
hey,
example. I don't care. Hey. The guy sucked when. Listen, when he started what like how many games for the Jaguars? They ended up in Buffalo, and that was a complete disaster. Listen, I wish I looked like the guy. He's a handsome son of a gun, but he just was lousy. He got paid, but he wasn't any good. So yeah, you're right. Teams have historically taken chances on quarterbacks, whether it's through the draft or paying too much in a trade, and they won't get a first round pick for Justin Fields. It makes no sense to me whatsoever. Dak Prescott might make $60 flipping million this upcoming season. Maybe. If the Cowboys decide, hey, we're going to just, let you play out the final year of contract and not do something else, which is going to completely neuter the Cowboys from a free agency perspective, I think, which sucks, but typical Cowboys, right? But bottom line here is that teams take chances on quarterbacks, and I just don't see why a team like the Steelers, who need a quarterback, who drafted Pickett, it didn't work out. I was 100% wrong about Pickett this past season. I'll admit it all day long. Go ahead and get Justin Fields for the 20th overall pick. It makes no sense to me whatsoever that this would not happen. And the only reason why I pick out Pittsburgh is because none of the other teams that are at the bottom of the draft order really need a quarterback, right? I mean, Tampa Bay.
At the bottom.
Okay, well, I think they're bringing back Baker, but, they're at 26. But are they going to go after Fields? I mean, probably not. The Eagles have a quarterback. The Dolphins have a quarterback. The Rams, they're not going to go after Justin Fields. They can't. The Niners, the obviously Kansas City with Mahomes, Detroit, Baltimore, they all have quarterbacks. But Pittsburgh at 20. Now you said Cleveland too. You're talking about Justin Fields going to Cleveland, which I think would be bananas. But it would be hella interesting from a fantasy perspective. Because all right, well, where's Watson going now? Who's going to pay Watson all that guaranteed money? Anyways, Pittsburgh makes total sense to me. I would be like, good. I got it, baby. I got Fields for the 20th overall pick, which may or may not pan out and do something. Mm-hmm. And then you put Fields in with Deontay and George Pickens and Freiermuth and the nice backfield duo they got with Harris and Jalen Warren, and giddy up an improved offensive line. You got something there, not only in real football from a fantasy perspective as well.
And if it doesn't work out, then you're in the same spot as if it doesn't work out with Bo Nix or Michael Penix or JJ McCarthy. Like all of these guys are a roll of the dice too, right?
Mhm.
Like so at the very least with Justin Fields, there is one aspect of his game that we know that he can deliver on an NFL field against NFL caliber competition elitely, and that's the ground game. And we know he can complete passes. Like it's not like he was just like, shanking stuff right and left all year long. Like that wasn't a problem. So
Don't say that word around your husband, who's a big golfer, by the way. That's a bad word. That's like the C word in real, like,
what?
and that you don't say that word to a
I know.
golfer.
I know.
That's bad.
Yeah, don't put that
That's
in your head.
yeah, yeah. That because then yeah. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry.
All right. So just to finish
Which,
the
by the way,
quarterback thought, what?
Lindsay's husband is a big time golf guy. That's why
Oh,
I
big
bring that
he
up.
is. He's yeah. Oh my
He was
gosh.
probably he was probably forced to play golf when Lindsay was on their honeymoon watching the combine.
There you go. Yes, he would have happily used that as an excuse to go golf. All of this talk about the quarterbacks is why I don't totally understand um a lot of the narrative around what's going to happen at the top of the draft. We're hearing tons of different things. First of all, we hear different orders of the quarterbacks from, it depends on who you're listening to, whether or not Jaden Daniels is clearly, I mean, some people think he's number one. Some people, there are a few analysts out there who think that he's the best one. Dan Orlovsky, I want to say like Lewis Riddick is in this camp, that they like him better than Caleb, ready to take him number one overall. It doesn't sound like that's what's going to happen, but my point is that there are people who like him the best. And then there are people, mock drafts that you see Jaden Daniels is going like way lower and Drake May is obviously number two. The point is that I'm trying to make is that none of this is obvious. Nothing's obvious. I think Caleb's going to go number one, but I have no idea who goes number two. And then my point also is that we're hearing all of these scenarios about possible trade downs. Like, do people try and pick up all this draft capital? And it's fun to talk about what you could get in return. And for a team like the Patriots that needs a lot across the board, you're trying to build a totally different squad here. And so a trade down is appealing in that sense, because you could find yourself, if you draft a quarterback at number 3, in a Carolina Panthers like situation where you have a quarterback and now you have nobody around that quarterback and the quarterback is set up to fail. And now it looks after a year like you don't even have a quarterback. And so I understand the concept of a team not being ready for a quarterback, but because of all of the things that we've just talked about, I cannot see a team sitting at number 3, certainly number 2, but we're talking about number 3 now because this is where I keep hearing it with the Patriots. I can't see a team with a chance to pick up a potential franchise quarterback. And Jaden Daniels is that, according to Dan Orlovsky and Lewis Riddick. And like, there are certain people out there that are like 100% sure he's the dude. If it's Drake May, obviously there are some people that have him locked in at 2 over Jaden Daniels. So they like him. So if you have an opportunity to draft that guy, I think you have to draft that guy. I think you have to, because you don't know when you're going to be back up there. And look at CJ Stroud and what he did in year 1. And we didn't know. I mean, he was number 2 after Bryce Young. So people liked Bryce Young better than CJ Stroud. CJ Stroud came in and it was like chef's kiss, like hit the ground running. Now they've got a totally transformed squad. So you could have last year been the Texans and gone, man, we've been real bad for a long time. We need a lot of things. I don't know if we're ready for the quarterback. What if they'd punted on CJ Stroud? What if they'd done that? He transforms everything for them. You have to roll that dice. You cannot move out of that opportunity.
And again, these things are very hard to predict. Like, let's not forget that almost every draft analyst loved Jamarcus Russell. Like, Mel Kiper was in love with this guy. And Jamarcus Russell is one of the biggest busts in the history of the National Football League, right? Yeah. I mean, so like this stuff, we don't know, right? Everybody's, like Zach Wilson. I mean, there you go. There's another one. Ugh. Hell, the guy was out of a job after 1 year, for crying out loud. The Jets wanted nothing to do with them. They bring in Aaron Rodgers. So, but to Lindsay's point, if you're a team that you've watched the tape and you've gone through the interview process and you love somebody, well, right or wrong, you go out and you go and get that player, right? So I've seen some reports where the first 3 picks are going to be quarterbacks. I don't know that this ever happened in the NFL draft. I have to go back and look. But you could see, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, after Caleb Williams coming off the board, because quarterback is so valuable, which again goes back to like why the hell wouldn't the Steelers give up the 20th overall pick for Justin Fields, or any team give up a first because it's Justin Fields. But that's neither here nor there. One thing though that I think is a positive is that most of these quarterbacks are going to end up elevating and improving the fantasy value of the players around them. So, for example, Caleb Williams, does he elevate DJ Moore? DJ Moore had a pretty good year with Justin Fields, but I still think DJ Moore would be a pretty nice wide receiver too, depending on what else the Bears do. They could end up getting Rome Odunze with their second first round pick. I mean, like they could be locked and loaded. Hell, they could bring in Saquon. Like that offense can be crazy good. You would think that a Drake May would come in and improve the value of, say, he goes to Washington again, just a scenario. Terry McLaurin, that's going to be a good thing for him. That'll be a good thing for the Commanders pass catchers. Jaden Daniels, if he goes to New England, all of a sudden, now New England didn't have any good pass catchers, but if they brought some people and some pieces in, that would certainly improve the offense, right? And improve Ramondre Stevenson. And then you look at Justin Fields, wherever he goes, if he goes to Atlanta, if he goes to Minnesota, he's going to help the value of the players there, right? So Russell Wilson, same thing to a lesser degree. Again, admittedly, he's not the same guy he was a few years ago in Seattle, but still, if he goes to the Raiders, I like Devontae Adams more. If he goes to Atlanta, I like Drake May more, or Drake London more. How I messed up a USC Trojan's name, Lindsay. I'm so sorry about that. So those are good things. And then after that, it kind of falls off, right? We expect Baker to go back to Tampa Bay. And then you're looking at like Ryan Tannehill, after that, it kind of gets a little bit thin, but there are a lot of quarterbacks out there who could come and make an impact and increase the fantasy value. And it makes the quarterback position even deeper. And Rhodes and I have talked about this dating back to, fantasy dirt. Quarterback's going to be wicked deep in fantasy next season. And you don't need to get one early.
Yep.
Trust me on that.
Yep. You're good. You're good this year waiting. And we both jumped the gun last year, and we were high on taking a quarterback early. We went against our
I freaking drafted Mahomes in the third round, and he stunk.
That didn't work.
Allison Chains thing, I got beat in the playoffs. Ugh.
It didn't work. Was there anybody at the combine who popped to you that you were like, oh, this is a more interesting prospect than I necessarily was thinking going in?
You know how I love the combine. It's
you don't care.
The most fun thing for me, except for it's the worst, and I don't really care.
So no.
Jalen Wright popped.
Okay.
I will forever love running backs. It doesn't matter that the position has taken a southward turn in terms of fantasy,
to say the least.
In terms of the league valuing it. I love running backs. I always will. Jalen Wright was definitely like, ooh, okay. He had a strong 40. Which again, who cares?
40.
But he was the second fastest running back in the combine. So, and honestly,
I've turned into that elitist person who's like, oh, you think 40 times matter? That's cute.
No, I just don't care. I'm just saying that he had a good combine.
Yeah.
Ladd McConkey. I'm just going to draft him with one of the last few picks in all of my fantasy drafts, just for the flipping hell of it, because I feel like I brought the world Ladd McConkey because I thought Phil McConkey was his dad, and Lindsay is like, who the hell's Phil McConkey?
True story.
So we joke, but
there's something to that though. The fact that Ladd McConkey's name keeps coming up, and he's not one of the top wide receivers, in that Marvin Harrison Jr. conversation at all.
Right.
But his name keeps coming up as who else you should keep your eye on? It's this guy over here. I think that there's something to that.
His measurables are almost identical to Garrett Wilson.
Who?
Maybe that means nothing. Right. I don't know, because I don't love the combine. I am not a scout. I am not a draft Nick. I will never. I am a fantasy football analyst. And so when you put a guy on the team, and I know what his skill set is, and if he fits with the offense, boom, I'll analyze from here to freaking, I don't know, where would I go, Linz? What would be the first? I'll analyze everywhere. Okay. Couldn't think of a destination. Let's see. I'm in Florida. I'll analyze from here to what's the furthest part of, I don't know.
Oh my God. What? You're going to do a lot of analysis. So much analysis.
Until the damn guy is on a team, you can't really analyze him. And I don't care how fast he runs or whatever, how strong he is. They're all fast. They're all strong. Well, that's freaking college football players going to the NFL. Let me see what they did on, on the tape when they played in games against good competition. I'm not talking about, lousy schools. And then we'll see what they do once you get into camp. And then you start hearing a little bit like Puka, right? Like last year, Puka. Lindsay was talking about Puka. Oh, you know what? I'm hearing Puka, hearing a little Puka here and there, Puka. And then, you end up drafting him late and holy cow, you hit a home run.
Yeah.
That's where I am excited. But Jalen Wright is certainly one of the players, and Ladd McConkey, somebody else that hey, they're continuing kind of like an upward rise in terms of their value. Mm-hmm. Now, whether or not that continues or not in the NFL, we're going to find out.
Yeah, so Xavier Worthy is a guy who obviously his name came up a lot because everybody wants to sit and watch the 40s, and the 40s translate to television better than any of the drills. It's an easy number to track. Like we can all watch somebody run 40 yards and then go, oh, there's a number. That's impressive. Yeah. And so it feels like easy analysis. To me, I think it's starting to feel more and more like irrelevant analysis because there's too many times, like you look at Xavier Worthy, who set a combine record in the 40-yard dash with a 4.21 official time. You look at the list of people who have run times in that ballpark, and there are a lot of people who have not done anything in the NFL. So clearly speed is important, and particularly at wide receiver. But how much? And in his case, I will say this, what everyone keeps saying is like the tape matches that. Like he's not like, a John Ross or somebody that just comes out of nowhere, runs fast, and then people go, whoa, okay, let's go get that speed. In this case, he's a pretty well-rounded candidate and he has the speed. And so you will likely see teams take him, and that won't necessarily be an obvious, like, well, that's going to be a bust pick, like some of the fast guys who get drafted higher. Like what I don't want to see happen with the 40 anymore is players moving up the board because they ran a fast 40. Like it just doesn't feel sticky at
John
all
Ross,
to me.
Like Darius Hayward Bay, like these guys, they ran wicked fast 40s and they ended up moving. I mean, Darius Hayward Bay got drafted ahead of Michael Crabtree, and John Ross went higher because he was fast, and he did nothing in the NFL, and neither did Hayward Bay.
Yep. Well, and now we have GPS data of all of these guys, and even at the combine, like Keon Coleman is a perfect example of this for me. Of like, I know they're not going to ditch the 40 because it brings eyeballs to the combine coverage and it makes it a bigger event, and we want fans watching, and for this to be a tentpole event, and you can't, get too mired down in like football practice minutia, right? Like then people won't watch. So they're not going to get rid of the 40, but I would make an argument that they probably should, in terms of eval, that it just is distracting and leads to incorrect analysis because they have the GPS tracking data and they can even measure how fast they're going on the field in the football drills that they're doing at the combine. And Keon Coleman ran the gauntlet in one of the fastest times for a wide receiver in that drill. That's a football drill, right? Like that's now I'm running and paying attention, catching the ball and continuing my route. Like these are things that feel a little bit more sticky in terms of figuring out how fast he's going to play on the field. He ran one of the slowest 40 times. So what do you do with that?
Agreed.
Excuse me.
You're all choked up.
I'm so choked up. Keon Coleman in every single way is that evaluation this year, though, right? Like, great gauntlet drill, one of the fastest times, one of the slowest 40 times, like contested catch rate, one of the highest in the NFL. Can he separate? Like, there's like all of these questions. He feels very high-low to me. Like, if there is a high-end wide receiver that feels like the numbers might point potentially to bust, it feels like Keon Coleman. But he also could not bust and completely hit. And like the college receivers with a high contested catch rate, again, that list, just like the 40-time leaders, it's a dumpster fire of busts.
At some point,
partially that is because if every ball that you catch is a contested ball, then you're not getting open, right?
Right.
So, but there's an example in that list that you can go, well, but Nico Collins. Take Nico Collins. Yep. He's all over that list too of contested catch rate at the college level, and he completely hit, right? Like he's a great wide receiver. So there's always that, like, maybe this is the next outlier. And so it just makes the evaluation process so incredibly hard. I'm with you. I think once we find landing spots for all these guys, and you go, how do they fit in? And then you start listening. Like what you said about Puka is true. That was because of reporting. If you followed the reporting in training camp and they're like, hey, Puka's running with the ones. And that's not a guy who they drafted high. They're not forcing him there. He's earning that opportunity. He's running with the ones because they think he's better than the other guys that they have. That says a lot, right? If you draft a guy later in the draft and then all of a sudden they're getting that kind of opportunity, that's something sticky for us to be looking for. So we're going to need to wait on almost all of these guys to figure out what their fantasy value is outside the Marvin Harrison Jr., who's going to get that opportunity. The guys who go really, really high are going to get opportunity wherever they go, because that's what you do when you use that kind of draft capital on somebody. And so those will be easier for us to judge, but there will be people going in the third round. And by the way, it's where the running backs are going to start going, right? Like I'm hearing second round is probably where the running backs even start. It's not a particularly good running back class, but there are going to be guys there that get plugged into offenses the way that they're doing those now with a guy who checks a bunch of different boxes doing different things. You've got your guy who's going to come out of the backfield on third down and catch passes. And, maybe that's Bucky Irving, who had a pretty bad combine. His relative athletic score was in the 5th percentile. Like, that's awful. He did not test well. And he probably will fall down the draft board a little bit because of some of these athletic numbers. And his size. His size is 5'9", 192. Like, that's not ideal. And so when you have somebody who's undersized, you want them to just be off the charts athletic. And he didn't check those boxes. But you look at his game tape for Oregon, and he's a great receiving back. So someone will draft him, plug him in as their receiving back, and that has fantasy value to us. It's not like bell cow stuff, but like that's a name that we'll probably hear next year in fantasy, regardless of where he's drafted.
And another thing that these rookie running backs have going against them, besides the fact that it's not a great class, is that, dude, the free agent running back class is crazy good.
Yeah.
And now Saquon not going to get tagged. Henry not going to get tagged. Pollard not going to get tagged. Jacobs, we're not sure. Eckler not going to get tagged. DeAndre Swift, we've heard nothing about the Eagles tagging him. I don't know why they would do that. So we've got the new league year that's going to be starting up here very soon next week. And we're going to hopefully get a lot of answers here. And then that will determine a lot of where these running backs do go. And if teams decide they want to spend the money on a back, like the Texans, for example, then maybe they go in a different direction. They go with a Pollard, they go with a Jacobs or even a Saquon, where other teams may think, you know what, we're going to sit back and wait until round 2, 3, 4 and get a running back and potentially plug him into our backfield. So that's going to be pretty fascinating as well. And you know me, even though the wide receivers have taken over, I still love my running backs. And there's a lot of good free agents that are going to be available here in the next few weeks.
All right, give me something to believe in, Fabs. So we wrap up
something
today's show.
That I believe in, and I'm gonna reiterate this point again, is that the combine, from a fantasy perspective, is about as useful as a screen door on a submarine. By the way, that line was stated incorrectly by Biff Tannen in Back to the Future. Do you remember that? No, you don't remember that one? Toss, do you remember that? You're young, but you've seen Back to the Future, right? No? Okay, all right. Great line, by the way. So for everything that you've seen and absorbed in terms of information in the 40s, and this guy's real strong, and et cetera, ain't gonna matter till somebody signs the dotted line and is drafted by an NFL team. It's great for like the Daniel Jeremiahs of the world. And by the way, I've got to get in touch with him to see if maybe he can join us here in the next week or two. But the unfortunate passing of Chris Mortensen, I don't know if that's gonna. Yeah, I felt really bad for DJ. I love DJ. He's a sweet guy. He wears his heart on his sleeve. That was really sad. Mort's a really nice guy. I didn't really know him super well, but we did get back and forth on Twitter from time to time over the years. And from what I've heard, he was just a sweetheart of a guy. But that's what the combine is for. It's for the Daniel Jeremiahs, and it's for the Mike Mayock's, and it's for the Mel Kipers and the Field Yateses. By the way, Field is going to be doing. Field's a really great guy if you don't know, from ESPN. So, those guys are going to be talking about the combine results and that kind of stuff. From a fantasy perspective, we sit back, and I would argue that what the coaches say and what the GMs say at the combine is more interesting than what happens on the field at Lucas Oil. Mm-hmm. And this upcoming week and in the weeks to follow, those are the weeks that are going to get interesting from a fantasy standpoint. So I truly believe that the NFL Combine has got its fans. Lindsay Rhodes loves it. I am not one of them, and I don't know that it really matters from a fantasy perspective. But coming up in the next few weeks, boy, Lindsay and I are going to have a lot to talk about with these free agent moves and potential trades, including maybe Justin Fields going someplace else that ain't the Windy City.
I can't wait. Like, clock is ticking for free agency, right? This is going to happen before we know it. We are so close to the new league year starting and finding new homes for a lot of these players, and I am here for it. I cannot wait. I think I'm with you in a way that is would surprise you maybe, because you think I'm, and I am a combine fan, but I think there's a proper place for everything. All of this data is just data. And it doesn't mean anything unless you know what to do with the data. And so, as you've said, you and I are not exactly scouring all of their tapes and know exactly what to look for in terms of what's going to translate to the NFL and stuff. But I think there's value in getting people on the same field against, the same type of, so they could see them next to each other. I don't think it matters for the top guys. I think that was way overblown, the whole Caleb Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. Like this, we've seen that for years. The top players have, for a very long time, not gone to the combine or participated in drills or decided to run the 40 or whatever, because they have nothing to gain and everything to lose. And so they just don't do it. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And by the way, I think it's probably worth checking this box. The question that was posed to Caleb Williams last week in his scrum by a member of the fantasy football community, and it was not a well-worded question. It was really combative, and it was a question that Caleb Williams couldn't possibly have answered. If you're unfamiliar, he was came out of the gate with are you afraid to compete? What do you say to people who, think
I heard that. Do we know who this person was that asked the question?
Yeah, yes, but I don't want to bring his name into it. I think
I'm going to Google it.
Well, okay, go ahead. But unfortunately, there were a lot of people going, well, this is what happens when fantasy football people get credentialed to something like this, and they work on a blog or a podcast or whatever. And now, like, there's no barrier to entry in terms of going to these events, and they're ruining it for the fantasy football community. And there were some people within the fantasy football community that were like, dude, like, it's hard enough to be taken seriously. Like, don't go do this kind of stuff. I will say, as somebody who spent 20 years prior to even entering the fantasy football community outside of just playing fantasy football. But I came up in this business as a traditional sports reporter and host. And, for over a decade, solely with the NFL. I have been in those scrums. I know what it's like to ask these questions. I know what this is not a fantasy football thing. It has nothing to do with the person working in the fantasy football community. There are questions that come up like this all the time. And I think that it's a larger picture issue of people who see what gets blasted everywhere, and this whole dichotomy that we have right now with like hot take culture. Right? Like, there are a lot of the shows, a lot of the people who are being paid the most money and get the biggest platform are people who say the most outrageous things. And so I think it's confusing for people who are trying to come up in the business and try and make a name for themselves to separate themselves from the pack, but also, want to do good work. I think it's just there's a lot of messages if you are new and trying to wade through these waters to figure out what's okay, what's not okay, where the line is. And this seemed like a really, and I'll tell you, Fabs, early in my career, there were interviews that I did that I have thought a lot about in the last week since that question was posed. Positions that I put athletes in because I was trying to be a credible reporter, and sometimes you think like, oh, well, this is the 60 minutes approach. I'm just going to ask the hard question. Sometimes the hard question what you think is a hard question is actually just an insensitive and immature question to ask somebody. But it's hard to know that at the time because you have all these different messages coming in about what's expected from you. And if you're like a serious journalist, then you're here to hold these people to account. And there's just so many messages that go through your head. And there are interviews that I've done that I hope never see the light of day that haunt me to this day, and I'm like, what was I even thinking asking that person that question? And I felt very righteous at the time. I was like, it was a hard question, but like it was a valid question. It's what all of you guys are saying on the message boards and stuff. Like, but it's different. And you realize this, I've realized this years down the road. It's different to say that to the person's face. And there's no reason that they need to be involved in that conversation. Caleb Williams doesn't need to know what people are saying about him and have the opportunity to respond. And we all know that because we see like what happens in our mentions. Every time you post something on Twitter, there are people saying crazy things. You don't have to give it the time of day. You don't have to let that see the light. You don't have to let that frame your conversation. So there's validity to people like that just not entering the chat, right? And so I think it's unfortunate that he was put in that position. It's unfortunate the fantasy football community got roped into that. And again, the point that I wanted to make before I went on this like full on rant that had nothing to do with anything was that I have worked with Fabs, like some of the best analysts or the highest profile analysts in the business of NFL, sat next to them on traditional NFL sets. And I can say with certainty that some of the best fantasy or not, some of the best analysis of the NFL in the last few years I've seen come out of the fantasy football community. They're looking for edges. So they are doing an intellectually curious deep dive, looking for information that isn't readily available. And they're finding it in ways that sometimes you don't find in the traditional NFL space. And while the reason they're doing that is to find an edge in fantasy, the edge in fantasy will only come to fruition if what happens on the real football field is what they're predicting to happen. The two are enmeshed. Like you can't do good fantasy football analysis without it being rooted in traditional football analysis. So stop it with the whole like, this is a different thing. Like we're over here analyzing football in a way that's completely different and unrelated to what's actually going to happen on the field on Sunday. It all stems from that. It's just that our conclusion, our thesis conclusion is rooted in something that is fantasy related. But the process to get to that conclusion is all rooted in real world football analysis. So stop shitting on the fantasy football community.
Anyway. I love it. I love the rant, and I love the that's two S-bombs that
you are going to count for the whole season, aren't you?
I think so far we've done what 3 or 4 shows together. You got 5 S's and an F. Okay. So I'm here for it.
This is me. This is me, Fabs. This is me without my children around. Okay.
I know, right? Well, you got to get it out now while the kids aren't around, right? So.
Although one of them is downstairs homesick. Fun times. Anyway, we've got lots more coming up on Thursday, some stuff from the Combine that we didn't have time to get into the show today. And so we will hit those topic points on Thursday when we're back with more of the Believe Fantasy Football Show presented by Bet Online. For Fabs, I'm Lindsay. Thanks so much for joining us.